The Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington released documents on Russian losses during the full-scale war in Ukraine on January 28th. Since February 2022, Russian forces have lost about 1.2 million people killed, wounded, or missing in action, according to analysts' estimates. These figures are virtually identical to the data from the Ukrainian General Staff, which estimated the total combat losses of Putin's army at 1,238,000 people as of January 30th. This exceeds the losses of any major power in any armed conflict since World War II. But in Moscow, they still try to ignore these numbers. According to analyst calculations, in Ukraine, the Russian army has lost 17 times more soldiers than the Soviet Union did in Afghanistan, 11 times more than during both Chechen wars, and 5 times more than in all armed conflicts involving both the Russian Federation and the Soviet Union since 1945. At the same time, during the largest defensive operations, the Russians advanced on average between 15 and 70 meters per day. This is also one of the slowest rates of advance among major military campaigns in the past century. The main conclusion presented in the report is that despite the Kremlin's official triumphant rhetoric, the Russians' actual successes on the battlefield are minimal and come at a tremendous cost, both in human lives and economically.
During the Pokrovsk offensive operation, the Russians advanced on average only 70 meters per day. This is slower than in the most brutal offensive campaigns of the last century, including the infamous and bloody Battle of the Somme during World War I. Why are the losses and casualties among Russian troops so high? First and foremost, it's Russia's inability to conduct effective combined arms and coordinated combat operations, poor tactics and training, low morale, as well as Ukraine's effective layered defensive strategy in a war where the advantage lies with the defense. From a report by the American Center for Strategic and International Studies.
It's no surprise that the flow of volunteers signing military contracts is steadily decreasing. In search of new cannon fodder, the Kremlin authorities have recruited prisoners, launched a real hunt for migrants, and lured foreigners into service through deception. Last year, the aggressor country sent at least 18,000 citizens from 126 countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America to the front lines. Against this backdrop, several international scandals even broke out. The authorities of India, Nepal, and Kenya demanded official explanations from Moscow. And this week, the Iraqi government announced the creation of a special commission to investigate and put an end to the recruitment of its citizens for the war against Ukraine.
Iraqi authorities state that about 5,000 of their citizens have joined the Russian army. An unknown number of Iraqis have been killed or gone missing during the fighting in Ukraine. Some families report that their relatives were lured to Russia under false pretenses and forced to enlist in the army. In other cases, Iraqis joined the army voluntarily for the sake of a salary and Russian citizenship. From a report by the Associated Press.
As usual, the Kremlin pretends that nothing is happening and that they have no problems with recruitment. As for the casualty figures announced by international institutions, Putin's press secretary Peskov stated that all of this is unverified information and urged people to trust only the data from the general staff. But the most interesting thing is that even the so-called Z-military correspondents don't trust the Russian generals. On January 27th, the head of the Russian general staff, Valery Gerasimov, claimed that Russian troops had supposedly captured the settlement of Kupyansk-Vuzlovyi. He said that everything was already under control and that inspections and clearing of the neighborhoods were underway. International observers immediately stated that the occupiers' fantasies had nothing to do with reality. Ukrainian battalion commander Roman Kovalev filmed a video in the city center by the House of Culture. He walks calmly, unarmored, since the city is controlled by Ukrainian troops. Good morning. Today is January 29.
Today, January 29th, 2026, I am in the very center of Kupyansk-Vuzlovyi. Behind me is the House of Culture, and next to me is Ukrposhta. You can see me even without a bulletproof vest, which means that Kupyansk-Vuzlovyi is securely under the control of the armed forces of Ukraine, and we will do everything we can to make sure it stays that way until the end of the war.
Glory to Ukraine. Well, sorry I'm not wearing a hat. On the deep state map, it's also clearly visible that Kupyansk-Vuzlovyi is not only not captured, but it's actually quite far from the front line, meaning it's not even in the gray zone. But the most interesting thing is that so-called Russian war correspondents immediately turned against Gerasimov as well.
Kupyansk-Vuzlovyi has been liberated? Well, honestly, why not just say Kiev has been liberated too? No urban battles have even happened there at all. Someone's calendar is still stuck in 2022. Unfortunately, the realities on the ground, as our generals like to say, are very different from their own reports. The desire to score another win is seriously worsening our situation and is making us send people to their deaths again. Instead of correcting our mistakes, we're only making their consequences worse.
The Russian military command is systematically spreading false claims about capturing Kupyansk itself. So, in December of last year, after a report from that same Gerasimov, Putin announced, and I quote, the complete liberation of the city. He awarded the Hero Star to the commander of the West Group, Sergei Kusavlev, and invited foreign journalists to visit Kupyansk. And literally the next day, a video appeared of the Ukrainian president standing in front of the half-destroyed city entrance sign, along with numerous photos of Ukrainian flags on administrative buildings. According to the partisan movement Atesh, in Kupyansk, the Russians trapped their own 122nd Motorized Rifle Regiment. Because of the generals boasting, the assault groups trapped in the urban area couldn't call for help or support.
Eager to report successes to Moscow as quickly as possible and strengthen their negotiating position, the regiment's headquarters prematurely claimed to have taken control of several positions within the city and its surroundings. On paper, these sectors are already listed as the rear, but in reality, fierce fighting is still going on there. As a result, the occupiers' assault groups, pinned down by Ukrainian forces' fire in the urban area, found themselves caught in a bureaucratic trap. They are requesting fire support to suppress Ukrainian machine gun nests and snipers, but the artillery of the 122nd Regiment remains silent. From a statement by the Atesh movement,
the Kupyansk direction has long been a sore spot for the Russian military command. The real situation undermines the narratives about Russia's military might, and all that remains for the general staff is to lie and twist the facts. Analysts at the Institute for the Study of War are convinced that this kind of rhetoric is used to pressure Ukraine and the West in order to impose demands that Moscow cannot achieve by military means.
The Russian military command is trying to create an alternative reality of the battlefield in order to influence the ongoing peace negotiations led by the U.S. and to convince the West that Ukraine should accept Russia's demands now, out of fear of future offensives or breakthroughs. The capture of small villages, covering only a few square kilometers, does not indicate Russia's ability to seize much larger and heavily fortified cities in Ukraine's fortress belt in the Donetsk region in the near future. From a report by the Institute for the Study of War.
The New York Post also writes about how Putin is lying to the whole world, claiming that the Ukrainian defensive line is on the verge of collapse. By the way, this very publication is known as Donald Trump's favorite newspaper. According to journalists, last year, for every square kilometer of Ukrainian territory, Russia lost an average of 93 soldiers, and the recruitment system is struggling to make up for these losses. Yet, the Kremlin dictator still dreams of forcing Kiev to surrender.
Having failed on the battlefield, Putin turns to propaganda. The Kremlin exaggerates the capture of tiny rural settlements along the front line and international border, presenting them as major victories, supposedly leading to breakthroughs, which never actually happen. Russia uses misleading flag raisings in disputed areas, cross-border raids, and staged meetings of top military leadership to visually reinforce these lies. From a New York Post publication.
Creating the illusion of offensive superiority while simultaneously destroying Ukrainian cities and killing civilians is a long-standing Kremlin tactic. Moscow uses lies as a weapon, trying to buy time and impose its own rules. However, with each passing month of the war, this is working worse and worse. And not only does the world no longer believe the general's bold reports, but even people in Russia itself don't believe them anymore.